Do you spend hours in your head thinking about something that happened, could have happened, or might happen? Do you ask others what to do so you don't make a mistake? Welcome to the Playing It Safe podcast. I am Dr. Z, your host. I am a clinical psychologist, an author, and a person that is super passionate about sharing with you science-based skills to overcome any type of fear-based struggles. Who doesn't experience fear? Who doesn't play it safe? In this show, we will discuss how fear-based reactions happen in day-to-day life, how playing it safe behaviors look like, sound like, and feel like, how you can put into action solid tips from behavioral science to get unstuck from worries, fears, obsessions, and anxieties, and how you can start doing what works, what matters, and what you care about. Behavioral science doesn't have to be boring. Thanks for listening, and let's get started. Hello everybody, this is Dr. Z, and I am back with a super special episode. In this episode, I am sharing with all of you part 2 of my conversation with Jonny Say. If you remember, on episode 27, Jonny and I chat about how acceptance and commitment skills, or how acceptance and commitment training goes hand in hand with compassion-focused practices. I think in part 1, you got the frame of what self-compassion is and how many times it can be misunderstood. Now, in part 2, you're going to listen directly from Jonny 3 different ways in which you can practice self-compassion when feeling stress, when hurting, when feeling like you're losing your mind. You will also hear me sharing a recent struggle that I encountered and how Jonny will respond to it with self-compassion. I hope you find this conversation helpful. I can tell you that for me, it was such a treat to talk to Jonny. I am a big fan of Jonny's work. I absolutely love how he delivers and how he practices self-compassion exercises. And I want to encourage you to go to YouTube and take a look at his channel. Jonny's channel is called The Mindfulness Circle, and you will see a bunch of videos with different exercises that you can use to guide your own self-compassion practices. I hope this conversation is helpful. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for your support. And as usual, feel free to email me with any questions or reactions you have to this episode. Have a wonderful week and see you next week. Bye-bye. If I can ask another follow-up question. If I am developing this new way of relating to my own struggle, my own grief, my own regret, how will that look? And if it's okay, let me share with you something that I went through last week. As you know, I am teaching this webinar. Last week, I had technical problems. My computers weren't synchronizing. And I finished the webinar with a sense of guilt, and my mind was telling me all types of judgment thoughts. Patricia, you should have prevented this. How come you didn't see this coming? You could have done better. And I did my best to just notice how those thoughts were coming and to label them as, here comes Judge Patricia. Right. So the feeling was heavy. The feeling was, kind of like on and off throughout the day. It took me, I think, a couple of deep breaths to just redirect, because of course when I'm teaching, I want people to have a solid learning experience, and when you're having technical problems, that doesn't help, right? I was judging myself for that. So how, if you had seen me that day and you had these thoughts like, Patricia, you should have prevented this, you could have done better, you should be prepared for this thing happening. What happens if no one comes back next week for the webinar? you should be offering something extra right now.
Yeah, it's a great example. And I think one familiar to all of us doing things online and running workshops and working with people online. And I think, doesn't it just show how much you care, which is a wonderful thing. I think in terms of working with that, it sounds like you moved quickly into diffusion, quickly into acceptance. And of course, we'd expect that of someone with your skill, and that's what we hope. I think sometimes, I guess one thing is how much of the compassionate self did you bring in to support that? That's, if I was working with a client, I would be interested about that, the way you're describing it. That's the kind of thing, when I've been working with people for a long time, they might bring examples like that and they feel like they've slipped back a bit and their mind's being really hard on them again. Or so I guess, the diffusion, the acceptance sounded good. What about the compassionate part? Did you bring that in? I imagine you did, but this is what I would ask a client, obviously.
Yeah, and I can tell you about it. One of the ways that I practice self-compassion is softening up. I know it sounds very abstract. For me, it's very grounding when I take a deep breath and just acknowledge that I am hurting. That right now I am hurting and it's hard.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what will be other ways that listening to this podcast could practice that self-compassion as they move throughout their day?
Yeah, and that's wonderful. And I think, that's that acknowledging. If we think about that compassion as acknowledging pain and responding with kindness, then, acknowledging is such a key part, and one we in our societies don't often like to do. We don't like to go, this hurts. We like to either push it away, ignore it, distract. And I'm with you. I do the same. And sometimes that's a hard sell for people to get them to. They're worried if they start acknowledging the pain, will it flood them and overwhelm them, or will they get stuck in it? So I think, definitely that acknowledging. I like a lot of the short self-compassion practices, very simply, acknowledging pain like you did, and then responding with kindness. So responding with different types of compassionate self-talk depending on what we feel we need in the moment. So, sometimes it's empathy and validation. It makes sense that I feel bad about this. I care, I want this to be a high standard and it really matters to me. So I get why I'm feeling like this. It might be common humanity, of course, if we use Kristen Neff's sort of ideas of going, actually, don't we all mess up on, doesn't technology fail us all, and don't we all beat ourselves up about it? And then, the supportive, motivating part. Okay, is there anything I could have done to have changed this? In compassion focused therapy, there's compassionate self-correction. So this is the way of doing self-correction, which really understands the context, the history, the reason why we've struggled, does it with kindness, does it with support, not shaming, not attacking, but encouraging behavior change. And so if there's room for that, then there might be, and this example I would imagine not, because it's technology just fails us, but it might be, in other contexts we can do that kind of thing. And then I always like then turning it to behavior. So the kind self-talk leading into behavior. What am I going to do? As you've taught me many times, doing the behavior, and then the thoughts and feelings follow, right? That we have to take action, and we have to do, as a behavioral scientist, this so well, that that can be the strongest for a lot of people. Actually, the actions of compassion are more powerful for change than the words or trying to do the self-talk. Sometimes it is, what can I do that would support me here?
I think we have witnessed all the things, all the strategies that we use to minimize our pain, including mindfulness of self-compassion. I know for me, hundreds of years ago, going into that place of softening up a little bit, it wasn't something that it happened from one day to another day. It's an ongoing practice. And that doesn't mean that it's going to make the hurt go away. I think makes room for it, but I can see how many times we think that self-compassion is about getting rid of the struggle. If you were to encounter that, how would you respond to that? If someone tells you, I try
Yes.
to respond to myself with kindness and with empathy. I validated my pain. And then I try to talk to myself as I would talk to my best friend.
Yeah.
And it didn't work. I was still stuck.
I try to do what I can up front to just, it's such an act thing, but undermine that emotional control agenda that actually that would ever be fully possible. So I try and do what I can to work with that, but people cling to it, it stays in there. So sometimes it's looping back through. A lot of that, notice, name, normalize, function, workability type stuff. And I guess to make it more practical, I mean, it happens all the time. So, one of the contexts I work in, the NHS, has been short-term therapy. So don't have the luxury of long-term, it's short. And I have an objective in my mind. If I do anything at all, I'm going to I'm going to try and help this person be kinder to themselves. That's the only thing I'm going to do. I might not be able to help them with the big stuff that they're coming with, but if I can get them kinder to themselves. And so I'll start compassion very early, and people will often come back and say, it didn't work. I still felt anxious. I still felt low. And really just trying to work with them to realize that it is a support, it's a resource. I like thinking of it like a muscle balm for that injury. It doesn't heal the injury, but it makes it more bearable, and it's more, it helps us, supports us through this. And I think this is where there's complication in the research, because so much of the research talks about the physiology and the results of compassion, that it lowers stress, you're less likely to have anxiety and depression, your heart rate variability improves, all these things that sound like ways to control emotions. So I think sometimes you have to, I think there's something in how we explain and teach compassion, and not sell it as some way to control your emotions. But I guess I'm bringing in different things here, but really, to go back to your point, I would go back over the idea that this is not some way to control your emotions. Has anything you've tried before really worked? And my own experience, like I do plenty of self-disclosure. I think it's in service of the client, and that, I still have plenty of anxiety and plenty of difficult stuff I deal with, but the difference is I can support myself through it, and it doesn't stop me doing what I want to do. And actually, I don't mind, you don't mind anymore. So using some of that self-disclosure to try and build motivation, looping back through things over and over again when needed.
Can I go back a little bit to what you say? I know you and I were very familiar with ACT, with acceptance and commitment therapy, and we are really invested in looking at what works, looking at the workability. So if you were to explain this to a person listening the podcast, how would you define workability?
Yeah. I mean, workability. If I was going to bring compassion into workability, I mean, workability essentially is our behaviors, our actions, the way we're using our mind and interacting with our emotions. Is that all taking us in a direction that we care about and that matters, and that, connects us to people, connects us to life more, gives more fulfillment?
Let me ask you a little bit more if it's okay. Time goes so fast. Time goes so
Yeah.
fast. It's incredible. And this is such a rich conversation. So thank you again for making the time. If any person is struggling with regrets about things that they have said, things that they have done, and they don't have a chance to have a regular meditation practice, why would you recommend them to practice self-compassion in their day-to-day life?
Yeah. Great. So I do like some of the well-known short practices. So in compassion focused therapy, Paul Gilbert has compassionate coping in the moment, which is essentially kind of mindfulness and labeling what's happening, connecting with your breathing or some sort of compassionate soothing resource, and then bringing in the kind self-talk and then moving into sort of action. So that's one, and I've got that on my YouTube channel, which I've got a lot of short self-compassion practices at the mindfulness circle, so I'll just drop that in because it seems relevant. I like Kristen Neff's self-compassion break. That's a really great short practice. In a way, I also like working with people to develop their own combination of things. So maybe taking something from ACT, like dropping anchor. I like Russ Harris's dropping anchor and adding compassion into that. So just some kind self-talk. Sometimes people have no idea how to do kind self-talk. And what would be useful to them. And this is kind of why Paul Gilbert developed compassion focused therapy. He noticed some of his early CBT clients were being very harsh and critical in their mind. So he developed this. So working with people actually to really think about how they talk to themselves in a kind way, how they develop that voice and that ability to do that, and then folding that in with mindfulness, like a little bit of mindful breathing or a little bit of grounding in the body, and then some kind self-talk, and then very much attention. So where are we going to focus on next that's going to support us and be kind? And action, what am I going to do that's kind? So really I would use those, some short practices. I would do them with people, do them a lot in sessions so they start to become natural. Very simply, kind self-talk, kind attention, kind actions, and then we can do things like reminders and routines and reflection. So how can we link it in with brushing my teeth, having a shower? How can we have a reminder on my phone to do a quick self-compassion practice? Relationship anchor, how can I anchor it in my relationship exchanges? So certain behavioral cues to train it up and make it natural. Lots more obviously with that, but there's some of the kind of main things that I like are, but personally I think even if you do one 10-20 minute session a week that's a bit longer, it'll help.
It is true that sometimes we think that if we decide to practice self-compassion or meditation, it has to be 7 days a week, rigorous practice, 3 hours a day.
Yeah.
But it's important to remind all of us that micro changes is that one tiny thing that we can do every day, that it will have some impact. And if a tiny thing is once a week or 5 minutes a day, that's a beginning.
So true.
Right? It's that one tiny thing that we can do that will help us. And just to summarize, kind responses can be empathic, can be motivating, can be validating what we're struggling with. That's something that we all can do as we move throughout our day.
Yeah.
Jonny, I have one last question. And this is not related to self-compassion. It's a question that I ask everyone because I just get curious.
Yeah.
If you were to have a chance to have a cup of coffee or tea with any person you want, Who will that be and why?
Oh, it's a great question. There's there's so many, but I'm gonna say the honest answer after this long in a global pandemic and everything we've been going through. There are some of my old friends that I've not seen for 2 years, and I would rather have a coffee with them than any any famous person, any great thinker, to be honest. So certainly them, and hopefully I will be having that soon. That's going to be my answer, to be honest.
Beautiful answer. I think we all have been missing the people that we connect and we hang out. So I hope that you can have that with your friends super soon. Jonny, thank you so much again for making the time, and I hope that we can chat again.
Love to, yeah, anytime.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, I will very much appreciate it if you will subscribe and share this podcast with your friends. And if you're feeling extra generous, I welcome a review on Apple Podcasts. Show notes of this episode are in the website playingitsafe.zone. Make sure to subscribe to my newsletter so you can receive more tips to stop all types of unworkable playing it safe actions. See you soon!